But she was very grounded and she listened and she didn't say any of those things were invalid, but she did talk to me and say, if you had a life-threatening disease, if you had a life-threatening physical disease, you would take the medication for that disease without feeling any shame or stigma around it. And I agreed with that. And she looked me very seriously in the eye and she said, you have a life-threatening disease. Welcome back, beautiful souls, to another Come Chat With Me. It's been a minute since I made one of these, and I thought it was probably time. So today I wanted to talk about my experience with prescription medication for anxiety and depression, why I went on it, and why I ultimately decided to come off it under doctor's care. I'd like to just put a disclaimer that I am not a medical professional, and nor am I providing advice on what you should or shouldn't do. This is just my personal experience with it. And I hope that this video will find some people who perhaps went through similar things to what I did and can perhaps help them on their journey of healing and falling in love with life. But first up, as always, I'll get you to close your eyes and feel into your heart space with compassion and without judgment, and just breathe into your heart space. So my journey with prescription medication for anxiety and depression started when I was a young adult. I was in my early 20s. I had been living out of home for a little while. I had struggled with anxiety and depression for as long as I could remember, but I'd always been very adamant that I didn't want to take medication, that I didn't want to go down that route. And that came from a place of partly shame, the thought of people knowing that I was on a medication for my mental health, and because mental health, though the awareness around it is getting much better, there was a lot of stigmatism. There still is, but there was much more stigmatism, back in those days, as if I'm really old, but times have changed really fast. And so I was concerned with the stigma around it. I felt like if I had to take medication that I was weak. I felt like I had failed or that there was something wrong with me. And honestly, I just felt like I shouldn't need it, that I should have some other way of coping. In the end, during this period, I did end up taking it, but it wasn't something that was easy for me, and those feelings around it didn't go away until much, much later, until I had made peace with that part. But I had a really good doctor who helped me see it clearly, that choice that I had made, and that helped me a lot. So getting back to the story, I was in my early 20s. I was living out of home. I had lived in share housing with some friends, which did not go well. And now I don't know that I would do share housing with friends again if I wanted to keep those friendships. I was in a relationship with a young man, and I was working a very basic job. I was working a retail job, which paid well for what it was, but I have always had this feeling that I wanted to do something purposeful and meaningful with my life, and working in retail didn't fit that bill for me. No shade against anyone who works in retail. I have the highest respect for retail and hospitality workers because you guys are in it. Like, you guys are. I really, this is just a side note, but I think everyone should work at least a year in retail and hospitality as a young adult, because I think the world would be a lot more compassionate and empathetic place, at least to retail and hospitality workers. Anyway, that was a sidetrack. So there was nothing particularly going wrong with my life. It wasn't my dream life, but there was no big events that were happening. There was no big grief or anything like that. But I had suffered with my mental health for such a long time. And later on in my journey, I would discover that there was a reason for a lot of that, and that I had gotten stuck in that energy of anxiety and depression. So I was living this life, and I was pretty unhappy about how I felt about life and what I was doing with my time. I was always in a rush. I felt like there was something I had to do, or there was something I had to get to, or I had to achieve, which was the anxiety. And then on the flip side, there was a part of me that just didn't want to do anything, that didn't want to function in life, that just wanted to rot in bed all day, rot in front of the TV. I didn't have Netflix at the time, but you get the idea. That's kind of where I was at, playing games a lot, video games and things like that as escapism, reading a lot of fantasy as escapism, which I still love, but I don't do it in the same way that I used to. It's not an addiction, it's not a crutch anymore, it's just something I enjoy doing. But I was struggling with my mental health, and in Australia, we have a program where if you go to a GP and discuss this with your GP and you pass some qualifications and tick some boxes, then you can get a certain amount of appointments with a mental health professional subsidized by the government. And I was pretty poor is probably the wrong word, but I was struggling at the time. I didn't have a lot of excess cash, so I needed that little bit of financial assistance from the government to be able to afford to get my mental health treated or seen to, which is a whole other discussion. Anyway, I'm trying to stay on track and it's not going well just as well. This is a come chat with me video. So I went to my GP, who I had seen for about a couple of years. I really liked her. She was very passionate. She was very determined to find the root cause of your problems. She was the first GP that I ever had that wasn't just straight up dismissive of my symptoms or my problems at the time if there wasn't an obvious solution. She was also the first GP that I ever had that didn't immediately blame any physical symptoms I was having on my mental health, which I'm getting so many great video ideas from this, but I loved her. She was great. So I went and talked to her about it, which was really difficult. And I'm pretty sure at the time I ended up breaking down in her office and I was crying. I was just feeling overwhelmed and emotional, and admitting it to someone was really difficult. So she was happy to refer me so that I could get that subsidization from the government. But she also talked to me about medications, and she was very gentle, and she asked me, how do you feel about medications? And I said, um, it's not something that I want to do. And we sort of discussed that, and I told her the reasons why, and that I felt shame around it, and I felt that there was a lot of stigma, and I was worried about being judged by friends and family about it. And more to the point, I would have been judging myself. But she was very grounded, and she listened, and she didn't say any of those things were invalid, but she did talk to me and say, if you had a life-threatening disease, if you had a life-threatening physical disease, you would take the medication for that disease without feeling any shame or stigma around it. And I agreed with that. And she looked me very seriously in the eye and she said, you have a life-threatening disease. And it really hit me in that moment. I was just so much crying because it felt like someone had finally seen me, even though I hadn't told her directly about my darkest thoughts. The survey that they get you to do had obviously pointed in that direction, and she'd been able to see between the lines. And I thought, you know what, I do. And that really shifted my perspective, that just how serious this was. So I ended up agreeing, taking a medication, and I did start seeing a professional as well. I saw a professional a few times, and although it didn't give me the greatest help, just because they were not the right fit for me, the medication was an entirely different experience. So I was still very wary about it. I started on a very low dose, nothing too serious, nothing too intense. And the first thing that I really noticed was that I didn't have those dark thoughts coming up subconsciously anymore. I wasn't living my life and thinking about taking the worst possible action in the background. So that really helped me. And over time, when I was taking the medication, I found that I wasn't so stressed all the time. I wasn't in such a rush, and I wasn't racing to the next thing, rushing to the next thing, like I was running out of time. And then after a few weeks after that, I started to notice that I had a bit more interest in engaging socially, and I had a bit more motivation and energy in life. And I was just starting to come up just step by step a little bit. It wasn't this miracle thing that happened where I woke up the next day and I felt amazing. But I do think that that medication at the time potentially saved my life. It certainly made life more livable. So I was a convert at this point, and having those positive experiences, seeing how valuable this was for me and obviously could be for others, really changed my feelings around it, my prejudices around it, and my judgment around it. So I believe that it has its place, and I think it can be a very important step, and I think it can really help a lot of people who are on the edge or really struggling. This is just anxiety and depression medication that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about anything else like schizophrenia or bipolar or anything like that, borderline, anything like that, because I don't have any experience in those, so I can't speak about those. This is just the anxiety and depression that I have experience with. So that was really good. It was really, really good. And I am so grateful to that doctor for so many things, but especially for that. Now, after a while, I started to feel pretty even keel. I was a functioning adult again. I wasn't just rotting on my days off in bed. I was able to look after myself properly again, look after the house properly again. All of these things that often slide when you're in that kind of place changed, which was really, really good. But after about a year, a bit over a year, I noticed that even though I was feeling a lot more even, I was also feeling very flat. So it cut off the extreme lows for sure, but it was also cutting off the highs. And the longer I was on it, the more I was just kind of feeling kind of grey, kind of beige, just okay all the time, but not necessarily happy, not necessarily passionate about life. And I started to miss that side, because though I have struggled with anxiety and depression for a long time, it would come in cycles, and I would have a down cycle, and then I would have a cycle where I would be doing pretty good. And I remembered what it felt like to feel really joyful and happy and having a lot of those things, those good things, those good emotions in life. But I wasn't getting any of that, and I just felt a little bit, in a way, I was starting to feel not necessarily depressed, but a bit unmotivated. I was starting to feel a bit robotic. I was starting to feel a little bit sort of just empty. It's not really the right word, but I just kind of felt flat. Flat is the best sort of word to describe it. So I discussed this with my doctor, and she said we can lower your dose and see how you feel. So I tried that. I didn't really feel any significant change. So she said we can try taking you off it, weaning you off it over time, and then see how you feel. So I ended up doing that. I ended up weaning off it, and I felt pretty normal. Normal. whatever that feels like. But I felt pretty good about everything. I felt rebalanced. I didn't return to that depression and anxiety straight away. I didn't crash and burn. So I was really happy with that. So in that way, medication has been really, really instrumental in my healing journey. And I think it was important for me to see that I could live a life without feeling those extremes all the time. And I'm really grateful to that doctor. Having said that, after that feeling of just kind of feeling like I was a little bit tranquilized or a little bit flat, I decided that I did not want to return to medication unless I absolutely had to. And under the guidance of my doctor and all of that doctor at the time, I didn't end up returning to medication under her. She was always so warm and approachable, and she always listened to what I wanted and what I wanted to achieve. And she was very different from the doctor who later on basically emotionally railroaded me into feeling like I needed to take medication again, even though I had made it clear that I didn't want to go down that path again. So, to sum this up, I am neither for nor against medication. I think it is an important tool and that some people need it, and that under a compassionate, empathetic doctor's guidance, a doctor who has your best interest at heart as a person and not as a client or a problem to be fixed, but as a person, I think it can be really, really powerful tool. However, I have decided that it is no longer for me, and I have found other methods, other ways of healing my anxiety and depression, and now I do not have it, and I am not medicated, and I get to feel the really great highs without worrying about the lows. So if you are on medication, there's no shame in that. Don't feel any guilt or judgment for that. But also, it was only one piece of my healing for me. And if you feel like you would like to find other ways of healing yourself, then they're certainly out there. And that's the focus and the goal of this channel, is to help support people in their healing journey from anxiety and depression, and in their journey to falling in love with life, because that's the ultimate goal, in my opinion. So that is my little story of my experience with medication. If you'd like to know about the doctor that emotionally railroaded me, I did already do a video about him, and I will link it so you can watch that, seeing the doctors from the other side. But know that if you have experienced that kind of doctor, that there are other doctors out there. And I have one right now, and I've had another one in the past, and they are amazing. But I fully understand what it's like to go to a doctor and feel like you are just getting pushed over and forced into something you don't want to do. So, sending you much love on this beautiful day, and all the joy and inspiration and healing on your journey to falling in love with life. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.